Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and I got a big special guest. We're going to be doing a live, almost AMA style broadcast. I'll be checking into the chat every once in a while, but we're about to get our red pill on because that term has taken on a lot of different meanings since Keanu Reeves spit it out in The Matrix as Neo, and it wasn't really him first, it was the Fishburne. Great actor, great character actor. Go Lawrence. All I could say is this, it went from something that if you were red pilled, you were looking into, subjects like, I shouldn't even say it, 9/11. Oh, it's YouTube banned. And surrounding issues on globalism, maybe even some secret societies, et cetera, et cetera. It turned into a culture of woke. I hate even saying the word, but some intelligent people are trying to take it back. And the Red Pill Expo was out in Connecticut this past weekend. My very special guest, Richard Andrew Grove of TragedyAndHope.com and at Tragedy and Hope on Twitter was there. You gave a presentation. You were surrounded by some big names, not only in the alternative media, but people like, I always get his name wrong, but the Rich Dad, Poor Dad author. Tell us what went down and what, Richard Andrew Grove, was your red pill moment. And by the way, what the hell is a red pill anyway?
All right, so there's a red pill and a blue pill. It represents choice. Choice is an aspect of freedom. So in one hand, you've got the blue pill. The blue pill represents a comfortable, non-threatening, non-realistic reality. It's an illusion, but it's very comfortable. The red pill involves work. It involves the harsh, actual reality. There's things going on in the world that adult minds need to think about. Right? These are not the things you think about in extended adolescence. These are for people who choose, they want freedom. Freedom has innately connected to it responsibility. So there's a choice. And if you choose the blue pill, you can go back to Disneyland. And if you choose the red pill, well, then you might end up at some place like the Red Pill Conference. And the conference was held for the third year. It was first held in Montana, then it was in Washington State. So this is the first time on the East Coast. And it's there for people who ask questions, substantial questions. They're looking for valid, verifiable, factual answers. So there's a group of people who don't want to think about anything. They are the blue. They are the blue. The people who want to ask questions and find answers and actually exercise their freedom during this lifetime, not hoping for some better afterworld, they're the reds. They take the red pill. So at the conference, you've got a variety of speakers from 5G awareness and solutions on how to push back against corporations that are trying to bathe you in electromagnetic radiation to the vaccine issue. Del Bigtree, who made Vaxxed, was there. He was one of the headline speakers. He also won the NEO Award for being a leader and being at the vanguard of not being against science and not being against vaccines, just for asking the questions why these companies can produce products that they're not held liable for any detriment or any damages caused. That's very unusual. And then for them to make it a mandate so that people have to consume these products against their will gets down to the essence of whether or not we own our bodies or not.
And you know what? Just to start there, I just did a story literally before this, streamed it about 20, 30 minutes ago about Jessica Biel being by the side of Robert Kennedy Jr. lobbying for the choice of parents to say no in California, saying, hey, we need to be able to do this. She's the wife of Justin Timberlake, another superstar. But the American Medical Association is now putting out propaganda that they feel like minors should be able to supersede their parents' decision of refusal. So you know what? There's a lot of push these days to get kids to decide things like, hey, I want hormone therapy. Hey, I want surgery to change my gender. Hey, I think that kids should be voting as young as 16, Bernie Sanders and others. And now I know what's best for my body when it comes to the quote unquote vaccine issue, but I'm still not legally allowed to drink till I'm 21.
Yeah, well, I wonder if it works the other way. If the children don't want vaccines, if that simple indication of their will is taken and they're like, oh, okay, that's taken seriously too, right? So is it balanced? So any one of these arguments, when they want something, go with it. Say, okay, yeah, but what about this? And then they'll say, not that. Then I said, you can't have this. So it's about balancing the logic and reason in these arguments. And what they want is for people to get emotional, because then you can't get to the point where you show that their arguments are intellectually bankrupt. That's what they can't handle. So they want to take it to the emotional. They want to call you names. They want to cause, a bunch of ruckus instead of actually getting down to on both sides are parents. On both sides, they have children. On both sides, they want to keep them safe. One has a strategy of vaccination because they don't know any better. And the other side has read the inserts. They realize that these corporations are making a product that are being forcefully mandated into people's bodies against their will. That's not right. And it's not going to stop at vaccines. Next, it'll be pills. Then it'll be some sort of virtual reality that you have to spend your time in during the day, right? So it's all about taking away the choice of individuals, which comes back to the red pill and the blue pill choice. And I think choice is the essence of freedom. If you want the blue pill, that's your choice. I'm not going to force my views upon you, right? I just hang out with the people over here who ask the questions, look for substantial answers. And it's not just on one topic. It's all across the spectrum of diverse content that we interact with as human beings.
And let's talk about that for a minute, because that, I think, is key. At least for me, it always has been about that choice, right? I don't love that it's basically propagated to a populace. I don't love that my friends and neighbors are taking these things that are harmful to their health. However, the choice is there. I'm not saying there needs to be a law that says, no, you can't. In fact, one of the things that I thought the president did well was the right to try something if you had a terminal diagnosis and to try an experimental medication to save your life. Why not? You want to put it into your body, buddy? You're an adult. I'm not going to argue with you. But don't tell me what I have to put into my body to keep others safe. That's a big problem. So obviously that was discussed with Del Bigtree. What were you talking about over at the expo?
Well, what I talked about was I called the presentation How to Win a Rigged Game. And in order to get to the part where you can win the rigged game, you have to understand that there is a game and how it's rigged. So I presented 5 exhibits of evidence over a period of like 100 years to be like, look, the game was rigged then, it is rigged in the middle, it's still being rigged now. Here's the plans for the future. I showed them the DC Strategic Trends Program out to 2050. I'm like, here's their quotes. They are planning your future. That is not freedom. You can't do anything about it until you know about it, right? So the point was, I showed the Dodd report, which was the Reese Committee investigation into tax-free foundations corrupting the education system and turning it into schooling in America, which turned it into indoctrination. Which tax-free foundations? Well, there was little ones like the American Historical Association that said the age of the individual has come to an end and the future is an age of collectivism. But there were also bigger tax-free foundations there. There was the Guggenheim. There was the Ford Foundation, there was the Carnegie Endowment, and there was the Rockefeller Foundation. The United States Congress from 1952 to 1954, led by Carol Reese, and came to a decision that these things were going on, that there were programs being conducted specifically by these tax-free foundations to move America from an individualist, self-reliance, self-resourcefulness, American culture, to an international culture that could be easily merged with the Soviet Union. This is quite shocking to people. So I took it step by step. I'm like, here's a quote. Here's what they're working on. Here's another quote. This is the findings from the Dodd report. It's a 17-page report. It's easily available today. You could go to Wikipedia and look up the Reese Committee, and it will be one of the source documents at the bottom. It's a very interesting read. And once you show it to people, they can't unsee it. And now they stop making these excuses. It's the system intends well. The teachers mean well. They're just doing their jobs. It's just, they're just incompetent. No. It is a planned system of indoctrination to take away the consciousness of young people so that they can't exercise a red pill, blue pill choice. That's exactly what they're doing. So I said, here's what they're doing, and here's what they're planning for the future. And it's not about stopping them. It's about knowing that goes on so you can go over here and do something that makes it obsolete. So then the second half of the presentation was about the solution. The solution that I've created over the past 10 years is a course of action called autonomy, which means the lifestyle of freedom. The ability to be able to say yes to the things you want and no to the things you don't want. That takes resources, it takes mental faculties, it takes skills, it takes competence, and it takes confidence to do these things, right? So I just got done with it was supposed to be a 12-week course, but it took me 17 weeks in the first season. 200 students from all over the world who learned how to break through all these things. First off, we take away your indoctrination. So the first 3 lectures were specifically, here's what school does to indoctrinate you, and here's the skills and assets you need in your life to become free of it. And then once I set that foundation, we built skills on top of it that can be taken with you anywhere in the world, that can't be taxed, that can't be confiscated, and that give you they allow you to write your ticket in life. Instead of asking for permission, you can now write your own ticket. What do you want to do with your life, right? So it's a skeleton key for success. It's a Swiss Army knife for life, autonomy.
And when you talk about that, you talked about resources. And a lot of people feel like, well, I just don't have the resources to do this. I'm a slave to my 9 to 5. Well, you may be a slave to that 9 to 5 now, but if you're getting up 2 hours early and you're putting in 2 hours into something else, something that you are trying to build, a new skill, to build on that autonomy, you'll find that not in a day's time, not in a week's time, maybe not even a month or a year's time, but over time, you will build that confidence, you will build that skill set, and you will have the power to move on because you will have built that resource.
Well, and it's what you referred to where people make the excuse. That's learned helplessness, saying, oh, I can't do this, or I can't afford to do this. First, we can break through all those mental barriers, and you use a question. Instead of making the assertion to yourself, I can't afford to do this thing I want to do, which makes you feel what? Frustrated, aggressive, helpless. That sucks. Say, how can I do this thing? Use a question mark. Then your brain knows to start thinking. And then you start calling upon your resourcefulness. And in the course, it's not just taking an online class like most people where you're by yourself. In the course, the 200 students interact with each other, sometimes 24/7, because there's a dynamic learning environment that they practice their skills. So it's part learning, and most of it is exercising those skills to gain the competence, to have the confidence to use them in the real world. I had one student who was pretty introverted, and at one point I said he was doing really great in this exercise. And I said, will you run your stats and tell me how long you've been on here doing this exercise? He said, 13 hours. I said, don't go out in the real world and tell anybody that they can break through the barrier that you had in 13 hours, because they won't go to work tomorrow. Right? We can't handle that many people in this course. It's, it's just starting out. There's only, we want the right mixture of people and they're learning together. But when you get it, it is awesome. And that's why so many of them came of their own free will and volition to the Red Pill conference, out of their own pocket, to meet the other students, not to come hear me speak. I mean, that was pretty cool, but to meet the other students that they've been working online with. And I had a student who came from Holland. I had a student who came from Mexico. I had a student who came from Hawaii. Right? The students in Australia thought it was too far to come.
That is a long, long ride. I hear that's a
They can wait till the Red Pill's on the West Coast or something.
Now, aside from the Red Pill Conference, you're actually going to be over at Pork Fest. Starts in about 5 days, guys. Runs for about 5 days. How many years has this been going on in New Hampshire these days?
I mean, I was going to look at my T-shirt and cheat, but it's almost 20 years at this point. I think it started in like 2002 or 2003. So maybe 17, 18 years at this point will be the...
And how many of these have you been at? What are the highlights for you?
I didn't start going. I was a late adopter. I heard about it from a lot of friends for years, from like 2010 through 2012. Then I went in 2013 was my first year. And it was so cool because it's outside. So some of these other conferences, Red Pill is in like the Excel Center, which is like where they play hockey and basketball in Hartford. So it's like a very corporate place. Pork Fest is outside in the beautiful White Mountains of New Hampshire. It's at a campground. Some people camp, some people stay in the motel, some people stay in the hotel down the street. It's an eclectic group of people. Usually 2,000 or 3,000 people show up. There's speaking engagements at all these different tents, and then there's the main pavilion. And last time I spoke right before Lynn Albrecht at the main pavilion. So you fit, 300, 400, 500 people in there. And so there's all sorts of things going on at once. There's agorism. There's a whole area of agorism where people have their own businesses. And I mean, one of the most memorable things I saw was there were these 2 kids. They're going around with a wagon and they're selling snacks and drinks, but they take Bitcoin. They only take Bitcoin. And this was like 2015. And I was like, these kids are smart because people around here have Bitcoin and they would love a tasty beverage, right? So you've got people teaching their kids entrepreneurism, agorism, these types of self-reliance, economic self-reliance, mental activities that turn into physical realities through business, amidst a whole bunch of interesting speakers. And there's going to be some eccentric people at any type of conference. Pork Fest is no exception. There's definitely some eccentric people that show up, but that's not usually, like, it's a family-oriented gathering. And there's a lot of interesting people from the crypto community to the free Ross community to people interested. The commonality is we're all interested in freedom and liberty for ourselves and for the next generations.
And I think that that's key. I want to say big ups to Ryan Erickson for the $10 super chat. Real news, keep it coming. I promise you that we will. And because of that, I want to talk about Ross Ulbricht. Okay. Now, Luke did interview his mother last year at PorkFest, I believe. I believe it was at that conference, probably after her speech. In fact, there was a piece of her speech there. A lot of people are still misinformed or completely uninformed of what the Silk Road actually was and what the dark web actually is, because it's referred to in this almost like Hollywood boogeyman fashion where you want to hit out on somebody, dark web. You want the most evil shit you can imagine, dark web mystery boxes, dark web, dark web, dark web. And in actuality, the majority of people that are using this thing are using it for open, free, anonymous conversation that is outside of what the internet has now become.
All right, so there's a lot there to unpack. I think I could do it. My disclaimer before all of it is I've never used the dark web. I never was on Silk Road. So if I make an error in explaining this because I'm a neophyte, now you know why. All right, so let's go to Tor. The Onion router is a piece of technology that was developed by the Office of Naval Intelligence for spies to communicate with each other on something called the dark web, which is a type of internet that is not Google available. So you go through a protocol, you enter into a place that is supposed to be more secure and private and harder to track your activities, and therein offers opportunities. So a young Pennsylvania State University graduate named Ross Ulbricht, I think he was 24, 25 at the time, created an entrepreneur, a practical application of libertarian philosophy. He was a member of the Ron Paul group at Penn State. He was a young libertarian. So you have somebody who learned about these principles and said, oh, this technology offers the opportunity. So he created a website that would be like an eBay for the dark web, meaning insofar as transacting, you're dealing one-on-one with the seller and you leave them feedback. So people were doing business based on quality feedback. Did they have integrity in their actions? And as a currency, Ross decided to use Bitcoin. So it was one of the first places, Silk Road, the dark web website, was one of the first places where they used Bitcoin. Now, on Silk Road, there were certain rules. You couldn't, do murder for hire, for instance, which was one of the accusations that later comes out. Child pornography, forbidden. I think counterfeiting of certain things like money, passports was forbidden. Now, I may be wrong on that counterfeiting part, but the first two I'm very familiar with because they're in the case history, and I'll get to that in a second. So he creates this website, and at some point, he's not the only admin. There are other people. Ross didn't have the technical acumen to create the whole thing, so he brought on other people, and they had an interchangeable admin that they called Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride, meaning that even though Ross's idea was encapsulated, he wouldn't always be the guy running the site. He wasn't interested in his goal wasn't to become a super billionaire. His goal was to get these ideas and put them into practice. So he's doing that, and at a certain point, he steps away from the project. And from the evidence, it looks like a guy that he was working with named Mark Karpelis, who ran Mount Gox, very notorious character if you read the literature.
Well, let's stop. Yeah, because Mount Gox, I think, is important. For those that don't know what Mount
Magic
Gox
the
was.
Gathering online.
Well,
and I don't play video games either. That's my other disclaimer. So
yeah, Mount Gox was a Bitcoin exchange, that would hold your money, that basically just said one day, we got it, and shut down and took everybody's cash, never to be seen again. God knows how much they actually made out. But again, when you're dealing with these sites, you better realize the regulation isn't there. And I want to go back before we continue into the Dread Pirate Roberts to the origin story of Tor and the dark web, because you talked about how it was an NSA spy thing. Well, it was also seed funded by intelligence, the way it was created. So if you don't think that there are some backdoors to track, trace, and database things through Tor, if you think you're safe on Tor, I got news for you. More than likely not, and I wouldn't be surprised if this latest DOJ bust on the dark web, possibly with all these pedophiles and CP busts, has something to do with that. Ashton Kutcher openly talked before Congress how he had developed tools to track within these networks of Tor and the dark web. So that technology seems to already be out there. Let's get back to how the site was run and how they railroaded this guy.
Yeah, there's always been vulnerabilities to using Tor from what I've read through the various years on this. But they were keeping it kind of on the down low so people would continue to use it and think they were safe, right? So what they eventually did was they brought Karpeles in. This is before they arrested Ross. So the United States government has a meeting with Karpeles, maybe more than one. He was under investigation. And according to the U.S. government documents, Karpeles was the prime suspect until he met with them in Guam, which is a United States, UK intelligence stronghold. So when they met with him in Guam, I'm reading that, I'm like, well, that means it's Anglo-American. It's not just American. There's no reason to meet with him in Guam. Right? So a couple weeks after that meeting, they decide Ross is the guy. They lure him into logging on to the Silk Road. So basically, Ross is in the library in California, and he's downloading the Colbert Report. He gets asked by an admin on Silk Road to log in. And he ends up logging in, at which time the police swoop in from all over the place. Now, he ends up going to, he gets into jail, then he has his trial, then he's in prison. And the trial had a whole bunch of things that went wrong with it. And Alex Winter, who made Dark Web, he was there at the trial. So some of these inconsistencies were viewed by people in the audience. But after the trial, going through the transcript, like the court documents and then the case history, it becomes so visibly egregious how our justice system has become little more than a system of applying pressure and punishment and incarceration to political prisoners. Ross is definitely a political prisoner. He's incarcerated for nonviolent offenses, claims that were unproven at trial. And the judge said, it's not because of what he did. It's because of his political philosophy. Catherine Forrest, the judge in his case, states that the sentence, this is to set an example for people who have his political philosophy. That's why I think that anybody who had ever supported Ron Paul or libertarian or freedom, they should understand that the precedents being set in Ross's case, they're not about Ross. They're about you. They're about you and your families, and they're about what they can do. Like vicarious liability is one of the precedents set in his case. That Ross he's as an individual, he is responsible for the actions of other people. That breaches logic and reason. And yet that is now precedent. There's a whole bunch of other precedents that are set in this case that are very dangerous and deleterious to freedom and very much give rise to despotism and fascism and all sorts of tyranny now and into the future. So that's why the case is important. So about 6 months ago, they were getting together the case history. And I said, look, this case history is awesome, because I saw some early galleys of it. I said, this is awesome, but people don't read anymore. It needs to be audio. So Lynn got in touch with another Free Ross supporter who already records audiobooks, and he was able to break it down into 20-minute chunks. So 6 weeks, every week, part of this story called Railroaded, the caging of Ross Ulbricht, came out. So I think it was like last October, November. For 6 weeks, you'd have this new episode come out. And each time I would listen to the finished episode, I was like, this is so much worse than reading it. When you read it, it's one thing. But when you sit and listen to it and your mind is having time to think about what is being said, nobody who listens to that case history can come out the other side and say, I think the official story of Ross's incarceration is accurate. It's just like a lot of other official stories. And by the way, the people who put Ross in prison are Trump's enemies. It was Chuck Schumer, Eric Holder, Preet Bharara, all Trump's favorite people set up and caged Ross. He's a political prisoner in America. And if Trump set Dinesh D'Souza free, then he damn certain should send Ross Ulbricht home to his family.
You
Because
would think that
anyone who looks at that case, you cannot make it through reading that case and not be like upset by it.
And you would think that, but I don't really have any hope, especially with what's going on with the Assange case. This politician, Sayed Javid, he's in the running for, I believe it is the prime minister now that Theresa May is stepping down, and he signed an extradition request. It's extremely symbolic. It means nothing. He hasn't been elected yet, but it shows people frothing at the mouth to extradite Assange to this country on trumped-up charges that are not real, 18 counts that will eviscerate freedom of speech and freedom of the press and the ability of people like you, myself, and anybody in the world to publish classified documents and not be guilty of espionage. Journalism will die if this happens.
I mean, we can talk about Assange in a minute because that's a whole nother similar case. But what we have on the table here is Trump's looking to be reelected. Now, I didn't vote for Trump, and I certainly was never going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I don't participate in putting like credence behind that whole thing because I know my vote's not connected to what they're doing. My will is not connected to what the government does. I understand that, so I'm not participating in that. However, what I see is this. Trump's trying to be reelected. If he were to pardon someone like Ross Ulbricht, he would have the attention of all those crypto people out there. Those crypto people, they make a difference. They're behind the scenes. They don't like to come out and do things. But I'm pretty sure that if he were to do something like that, a lot of people would at least give him the benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, I might vote in this election, even though, he would get people's attention. That's interesting. The other aspect is how would Trump ever become interested, aware of these sorts of things? Well, one of the things I hoped to do last weekend was introduce Lynn Ulbricht to Robert Kiyosaki, because Kiyosaki is friends with Trump. They wrote books together, right? So if someone like Kiyosaki understood the value behind the Silk Road case, that it's deleterious to people's freedom. Like he talks about, he's a capitalist, he's about freedom. Well, let's put those two things together, right? It's not capitalism to put people slaves in cages and float those on the public market as like, oh, this is stocks, right? No, that's a slave trade, right? So as soon as we stop advocating the slave trade and start advocating justice and freedom, I think we're all going to be a lot better off. But for Ross to get out, the Supreme Court has turned down the appeal. They don't even want to hear about it because the people that put them in place, those are the people that put Ross in prison. So there's only like a limited time slot to get Ross's case on Trump's radar. Now Lynn did a petition, and they have over 100,000 signatures for people to look at the case. I don't know if that's good enough for the White House to take up. I know Trump's probably only concerned with reelection. So if there's not some connection between reelection and pardoning Ross, then I think it would be risk to say, let's wait till Trump's second term and get Ross's pardon back on his table.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath since he put Chelsea Manning back in jail and he pardoned Conrad Black and after the fact, just so he could do business more than likely, and then Scooter Libby as well. So, you know what?
Yeah, but Ross didn't do anything like those characters.
Exactly.
Right? Ross is the libertarian who ran a website that was nonviolent, and the accusations, like there was, once you get into the case history, so the hashtag is railroaded, and it would be freeross.org/railroaded. And it's the whole video, audio, text, everything. Just listen to it and you'll hear. On Friday, exonerating evidence is admitted for Ross. And on next Tuesday, because it was a holiday, on Tuesday, that evidence, the jury is to ignore it. It never appeared, right? So like evidence disappears. There's all sorts of interesting things. So even if you're not into the Ross case, just listening, it's like listening to a movie. You're like, oh, this is a really good movie. Only this is a tragedy because it's happening in reality. It's not fiction, right? So I don't know, however you need to get your friends and family to listen to it after you do, that's your thing. But my job was to make sure you knew about it so you could have that choice, red pill, blue pill for you.
No, absolutely. I just don't trust this president. I'd love to be wrong on this issue. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of other geopolitical things we could be talking about. The attacks in the Gulf, the response in the Gulf, where this is now going with Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Iran. I don't see. Here's the thing.
That's all going in the circle, but I think that's there to distract us from Assange. So I haven't kept up. Last I saw, the Brits took him out of his place, and then he disappeared for a while. And have you heard anything? Is there anything known about his whereabouts?
Well, I mean, I did a video 3 days ago I think 3 or 4 days ago, about the leaked video. First, it was still shots in the video with him in prison. Then they sent a doctor at the behest of his health, emergency style, and the UN talked about that. But since then, I haven't seen anything. It's probably been about 48 hours. The latest story was this politician proselytizing about the extradition and how he clearly is guilty of all these things and needs to see justice. It's unbelievable. It's vomitous. But my point is this. You're talking about a re-election to Trump, right? And things are really heating up in the Gulf. I don't see how military conflict at this point is not somewhat inevitable. If he attacks Iran, is he more or less electable? Have people become dumb enough that if we actually start another war, that's a selling point for the 2020 election? I mean, that's a great question because we haven't had a public conflict like this one, say, since Iraq. Even Syria was kind of shrouded. Most people on the street, they have no idea that there are ground troops or any kind of military action on a large scale there. So take it away.
It's interesting because the way you see it, it's almost the opposite of the way I see it. So you think that so you say Trump starts a war and that makes the people support him so he gets a second election.
Does it? I'm asking that question. I mean, have they become that dumb?
Watch this. Yeah. Trump starts the war and all the military contractors that make money from him make sure he gets reelected. I think it's the top down and not the bottom up version of the story, unfortunately. And let me just I'll lay this out there. When I looked into the WikiLeaks, DNC, Hillary Clinton, all that stuff before Pizzagate came out, when people were still looking at real things in the WikiLeaks that were just like verifiable, and before it got hyperbolized by next week's News Today, in there were the Lynn Rothschild emails where Hillary and Lynn are like XOXO, miss you, like hugs and kisses emails. I thought that was interesting. I'm like, well, Hillary Clinton is definitely close to the Rothschilds in this election, and they have been close, and they honeymooned in the White House when the Clintons were there. So there's that relationship. That's defined. But what about Trump? Does Trump have some indebtedness to the banking infrastructure that has been puppeting politics in this country for since the 1840s? The answer is yes, but it's not easily found. So do you know off the top of your head what Trump's Rothschild connection is?
Is it Adelson? Is that it? Or I know Sheldon Adelson.
No, that would be a good guess. And he also has interesting Khashoggi and bin Talal connections. We could talk about those in a second. Mm-hmm. But his Rothschild connection comes in the form of back in the early 90s when Trump was experiencing his bankruptcies, right? So Trump had been like a front man for other financiers. He puts his name on the deal. He makes it happen. He's like a rainmaker in that aspect. So he had been going through these bankruptcies with, I think it was in New Jersey casinos and hotels and whatnot. And he gets bailed out, for lack of a better term. And now this is in a Bloomberg article from 1990. It's March 92. It's called Donald's Trump Card. So it's a Bloomberg article. You can't find it on the internet, but you can find it in the Wayback Machine. And I know you have people that watch you, Jason, that'll do this. So go to the Wayback Machine, type in.
I have it right here, buddy. I got it.
Right,
1992. It's up. No need for a Wayback Machine. Jason Burmis pulls it up. The Donald's Trump Card. He just got a better deal than expected. And if real estate revives, ... So continue.
So Control F for Rothschild, and you'll find on page 2, Wilbur Ross of Rothschild Inc. bails him out, and they decide that Trump's name is still worth money, so they'll keep it on the buildings, right? So this is all discussed. Wilbur Ross was Trump's first commerce secretary. So as soon as he got in the office, he's like, I got to name a cabinet. Hey, Wilbur Ross, so he paid back his debt right away, and Wilbur Ross is no longer there, which indicates to me that whatever they needed to do with Wilbur Ross, he's done it, and they got a new guy that's going to go in and do his thing. So yeah, none of the people that are occupying office are too far from where the money flows so easily. And you can find it in the WikiLeaks. There was also people in that pizza situation that had funding from Lynn Rothschild and held fundraisers for those types of people. And they also have funding from Soros. If you check Soros's documents and his nonprofit foundation, they were giving money to these places. So I think that was all a honeypot, and it was used on purpose. It was put there knowing that someone like Seth Rich would leak, and then they could have people claim, and then they come in and say, oh, we're going to take away everybody's free speech. We're going to start censoring. That was kind of like the whole dominoes started falling from how do they defend themselves from WikiLeaks and Podesta's password with the @ sign as the A.
I think they just took what was out there and spun it. I think that, honestly, if you look at the coded words, they do need to be looked into. The David Brock connection with Alefantis I think is a very real one. Alefantis, I tweeted about Alefantis by mistake in 2012 because Alephantis at the time was named in a lawsuit from a previous boyfriend of David Brock, where there was some litigation going on, and he was basically threatening to release information on Brock and others, and it got settled in court. Especially with the odd shooting there, the fact that the news crew actually showed a bullet hole in the computer, and one news agent,
One shot.
yeah, one shot,
into
and the
hard
news
drive.
agency talked about it going through the hard drive, but if you actually look at where it was shot through, it looks like it was shot through the case and missed the hard drive altogether. And on top of that, we have hard drives that were literally destroyed 3/4 of the way in the World Trade Center that we were able to recover information off of. So don't give me that bullshit. I do tech. I know what's going on there.
World Trade Center is true until Kroll bought Convar, and then that all went away.
Yeah, weird. So weird. It's so weird that Kroll did that. I mean, you'd think they'd want the information, the hard drives out there. It's so odd.
Now, David Brock, you mentioned, he's also into WikiLeaks. Lynn de Rothschild also threw a fundraiser for him. So there's a bunch of financial connections that could be dug into, but everybody kind of got scared away from that because they saw anyone, like when Reddit deleted that whole thread on that topic, that people were like, whoa, they're starting to censor stuff. And then ever since then, now it's just becoming like, oh, Dan Dix got demonetized, so-and-so got demonetized. Yeah, it's just happening everywhere. And if we don't learn to become self-reliant and work together non-competitionally, right, very quickly, then they're going to get their way. They want Technocracy Inc. They got the robots, they got the AI, they got the drones, they got, they're locking it down. Man.
One of the stories
carrying around your little homing device, spy device, little Stasi in our pockets, right?
Yeah. And it's going to be more. I mean, they're all trying to sell the home devices now that do the facial recognition and follow you around. Google's got one. One's called Portal. Facebook. Amazon's going to launch one this Christmas. It's inevitable. Oh, man, you just brought something up that I was totally going to go. Oh, yeah, the censorship issue, the working together issue. So now Alex Jones, if you type his name, I did a video on this. I wanted to, hey, tomorrow's news today, they posted an article, and Paul Joseph Watson, I still like some of his stuff, although some of it gets worse and worse by the day. But he posted something that Alex had been delisted from Google, and it was the third or fourth page that you actually got Infowars.com. So I gave it a test, and it was true. We did it live on air. It took 3 full pages of a Google search to pull up Alex Jones, from a United States IP address. And that's incredible to me. And even sparsely in there, aside from, media hit pieces and whatnot on there, they also went to the woman Alex Jones commentator that's nowhere near as famous. Obviously should not dominate the headlines, but just that his own website is delisted to the 3rd or 4th page of the most powerful search engine, phone operating system, et cetera, in the world is pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. It's very, it's very scary. And like, there's no schadenfreude in it. Like, we know Alex, and Alex is an imperfect human being, just like the rest of us. He's a human being, right? So while we may have some, amusement over conflicts like that, sometimes we never all lose the focus of freedom's important. So let's just talk about it outside of Alex Jones, right? Because the whole court case, the transcripts, the depositions, right? There's a lot of information out there. It's not about Alex. It's about the audience that tuned in for this type of information to that place that he purveyed at one point in time. He used to like purvey information, right? He would have interesting guests on. So there was 35,000 guest interviews on YouTube that are just poof, gone. No more John Taylor Gatto, no more Bill Binney over the years that Alex was on the radio. No more, any of the people, all this like that. They are memory holing the relevant history of the early 21st century. You know why? Because they want to fuck over people in the future. They got a good plan. Take away information now, make them all dependent in the future. It's going to work unless some of us, all of us, work together and start putting this information together, time capsuling it, podcasts, videos, deep web, dark web, Tor, wherever. Just get it out there so that people in the future have this as well as people in the present. The people we're playing against, They have a long-term strategy. They plan their plan bigger than one person's lifetime, so that at any given point, their plan's like bigger than you. And if you want to look at it, it's DC Strategic Trends Program 2050. That's the latest document. That's another 30 years they're projecting into the future. And if you go back to the 2007 document and say, what was going to happen around 2020? They're doing it right now. These people, they're not prophets. They're not like, they don't have a crystal ball saying, here's the future. They're writing it out. They're like, what would you like to happen? I'd like to see civil unrest and immigrant problems. And, they're making a plan. And without anyone else reading it, they're carrying it out. They're ultimately funded. Like, they have unlimited funding. They have unlimited capacity to indoctrinate people. They've been doing it in America. They've spread it all around the world. Now people can't tell the difference between fact and fiction. They don't know that they can ask questions and find real answers on their own. They have to wait for the TV to tell them. It's like the telescreen in Fahrenheit 451, right? Montauk goes in. His wife's all like having a conversation with the TV. He's like, wow, that's weird. I'm going to go read a book, even though it's illegal. Right? These guys in the past who were talking and painting out the dystopia, they weren't creative people. They were hanging out with the eugenicists and the polymaths and the globalists that all came together and said, we don't like freedom. We think we should have all the control. These people are dumb. We should breed them out. We should sterilize them.
Yeah.
Right?
No, you're not wrong. And it's not a mindset that is new, by the way. And,
right.
One of the things that really upset me last week with Trump going over to the UK and hanging out with the royal family, and especially Prince Andrew, hint, hint, Epstein Island, is the fact that we tolerate that type of mentality that we are somehow serfs that should be serving royal bloodlines. These people have an unlimited wealth, unaccounted for, untaxable, are protected by the quote-unquote government. We're fooled into believing they don't have any political relevancy, but the Saudis do, that royal family does, who were there, by the way. The Saudi royal family also at these dinners of prestige. And until I think that we realize that the idea of royalty anywhere in 2019, rule by bloodline, rule by nepotism, we're destined to be serfs, and techno serfs at that. A lot of people call it the technocracy. I never call it the technocracy. The technocracy implies there's some kind of competition. But when you get up to the highest levels, of technology, there is no competition. It is a technopoly of these people that are so embedded with the government, it's hard to see how we can even say that Google is a private business institution, or that it's separate from its news division, its Google News initiative with Vox. How there's not an antitrust suit just based on the fact alone that Google has put money into Vox as an authoritative source officially, and YouTube put a press release out talking about promoting Vox and others, then Vox calls for the banning of somebody else in the media field, and they basically obey, bow down, while the rest of the media just dicks up and is like, good job, great, get him out of here, woo, get him more. Go after Philip DeFranco, who's about as milk fucking toast as it gets. Yeah. Milk toast. They're going after all speech that's even this far away from what they're trying to sell.
Anything they don't like is to be censored, and that is totalitarian, and that leads. That just shows that despotism has gone to Spinal Tap 11 at this point, right? And it's only going to get worse. They're going to turn it up more, because if you've ever read the Gulag Archipelago, it'll tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're going to start disappearing people, putting them in camps, and it's going to be because of your political persuasion and in your speech.
Not only will they do that, Richard. Right. But while they do that, they'll parade tapes of that same person living it up and looking like they're having the best time in the world with a deep fake straight out of The Running Man, while they're being tortured in a camp the last 15 years. And they even may have him, as a political figure that posts on the internet and, maybe even as controlled opposition. That's where we're at. We're so close to a reality being sold to us that is more diabolical and evil than we could ever imagined digitally, that will be undiscernible from seeing it with our own eyes and the reality we live in today that we're in a dangerous place, and people don't even realize that. It's not even in the
once
conversation.
they do virtual reality, like once that becomes bigger, it's just going to be worse. So let's go back to that topic. You said instead of technocracy, you preferred the word technopoly. Are you familiar with the book by the same title by Neil Postman?
I am not.
It is a wonderful read, and you could probably get it on e-reader or however you like it. Neil Postman, he wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is a great talk. Just look him up on YouTube. You can hear the talk. And basically what he's saying is that people are replacing the meaningful things in life with empty things in technology. And this was in the 80s. So then he wrote a book called Technopoly, basically saying the adoption of technology that you don't understand what it is or what its purpose is deleterious to human freedom. And so Technocracy was the official plan created at Columbia in 1932 and then adopted by Brzezinski and David Rockefeller. And that's what trilateral is. That's why David Packard of Hewlett Packard is on the Trilateral Commission. And I'm pretty sure that's the same guy, David Packard, who fired Steve Jobs. And it's also the same David Packard who fired Anthony Sutton from the Hoover Institute of Peace.
And Anthony Sutton, the author of probably the most prominent book on Skull and Bones and the power structure there, correct?
That is absolutely so. Sutton's first 3 books were on how the Soviets were using Western technology to build up, and then his next 3 books were breaking that down for the public. So it was Wall Street and Bolshevism, Wall Street and Hitler, Wall Street and FDR. Then he wrote a book on the Federal Reserve. He wrote a book on diamond. There's a whole bunch of books he wrote. But the Skull and Bones book that you mentioned, that came from Charlotte Iserbyt. So Charlotte Iserbyt's dad was in Skull and Bones, and when he passed away, she found this stuff. And she didn't know what to do with it. And she knew Anthony Sutton. So she calls him up and says, Anthony, I got these documents. Would you like to see them? He said, oh, yes, please. So then he writes his book based on actual Skull and Bones documents. Other interesting fact, Charlotte Iserbyt's grandfather went to South Africa and worked in the gold mines and diamond fields with Cecil Rhodes. Mm-hmm. So she had those 2
Rhodes Scholar, by the way, the guy that if people don't understand what that is, and that's a grooming house for future CFR members, future political elites, technological elites, you name it, men of business and prestige, if you will.
Yeah, here's the breakdown for that. So Cecil Rhodes was a British citizen who moved to South Africa, and his brother was there mining. And as soon as Cecil Rhodes gets there, his brother's like, oh, they just discovered gold over here. So have my diamond mined. So Cecil gets his diamond mine. He starts to conglomerate other areas by buying the only pump, letting everyone else's mines flood, then buying them pennies on a dollar. And then he goes to Oxford. So he goes back so he can get his upper crust education. He discovers that the British Empire is seeking to take America back. So Cecil Rhodes joins the Freemasons. Oh, they also have a similar goal because they're kind of British controlled. So now he has this enormous wealth. He's got these big goals that aren't just him. So that's how to become successful on the other side. The globalism is discover their goals and lend yourself to their goals. Kissinger, Brzezinski, all these guys, that's what they did. They helped the guys that were making the globalists. They're like, hey, here's how to make it better. So Cecil Rhodes, he comes back down to South Africa. He becomes enormously wealthy. De Beers Diamond Cartel was started by and maintained through the people who carry on his legacy. He died at 41. Before he died, his last and will and testament, and Lord Rothschild was one of the people named in there that had financed him. So he was giving money and power back to the people that financed him. So the Rothschilds were involved. He said he would like his wealth to go to bring America back into the British Empire. He said, what if we created a secret society, the specific purpose of which was to bring America back into the empire? And then he said, so they're going to create a secret society, and that's called the Rhodes Round Table or the Milner Group. They created World War I. They created World War II. Like, these are the people that control the CFR. And then the Rhodes Scholars, which was in Oxford, bring people from other countries, anglify them, and then send them back. A huge number of Germans were brought in to be Rhodes Scholars before World War I. So when World War I happens, British intelligence already has academics and people in their German intelligence who are loyal to their
Mm-hmm.
efforts. So the most famous Rhodes Scholar in this country was Bill Clinton, because he became president of the United States. Obviously, a notorious drug smuggling history associated with him, which also comes along with the British legacy of their opium monopoly. So the reason we're in Afghanistan is because of the opium monopoly. The reason that America left the British Empire was partially because of that. right? And there were a whole bunch of families, call them the Eastern elite, who still had opium money even after America fought Britain for freedom. So there's always been this magnetic pulling it back together. And because we never learned to speak a different language than the British, it's easy for them to do in the 20th century. And now you see American, TV socialite people are marrying into the royal family and everything's like hunky-dory and we're all aligned on all these wars. So it's very much Cecil Rhodes' last will and testament. His goal has been achieved by this point. America has become the property managers for the real estate empire that is the British Empire.
Love it. I love that breakdown, and that's why we have Richard Andrew Grove on this program. TragedyandHope.com is the spot. At Tragedy Hope is the Twitter handle. I want to remind people, PorcFest coming up in 5 days. Will you be there all 5 days?
I'll be there Wednesday through Sunday.
Wednesday, so pretty much all 5 days. Catch him. You got anything else to say, my brother?
No, I appreciate these opportunities to get on here because it's very easy for me to just get on and gab with you, Jason. We have such a long history and such a close interest of topics and intellectuality. It's always a pleasure. And I know you have a very smart and active audience. So anytime I can get, free Ross's story out there or any sort of thing like this, it's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for coming in. And guys, if you like this interview, thumbs it up, share it, put it on social media. Hit that subscribe button right now. Join the Burmis Brigade. And you know what? I love the notifications. I love when you join me live. Believe me, it helps the channel. But I'm doing, 5, 7. I'm trying to hit 10. I'm going to try to do a 10 video day. Just stars my video section. Come back once a day. I guarantee there's going to be some subject matter you're going to want to look at, whether it's Iran, Nexium, MMA, Jeff Bezos, 9/11, Dershowitz, the moon, Epstein. Hell, we talked roundtable groups today. We talked Cecil Rhodes. We talked royal families. We talked dark web, Ross Ulbricht, Assange. So much. We're hitting you with actual relevant information. I'm not giving you the bullshit left, right, tranny paradigm that's out there today.
Upper level.
Upper level. Forget about the outrage culture, guys. It's not the left that's your enemy. It's not the right that's your enemy. It's a very small group of very, very able-bodied and resourceful elites with power, money, and influence at their fingertips. I will see you guys on the flip. Thank you so much for joining me.